Hello friends, welcome. Friends, today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic, and let me tell you that you will be really interested in this discussion because of the reason that we are going to see a regular budget soon, and it is important for us to understand that how our economy is performing and how it has changed over the period of time since 1971, because the character of the economy cannot be seen or visualized within a short window period of time, because there are a lot of negative sentiments like the jobs are not growing, we are seeing a very lopsided growth, the economy of the country is not performing well because the income levels are not rising. So there could be a lot of negative sentiments we would be laced with because of the perception, which are kind of within a very short period of time, because we generally don't see a larger picture. So what today I am going to do and make an attempt to do, to try to give you a very large picture over a long period of time as to how India's economy has transformed from an archaic economy of the past to a modern economy which cannot be called as perfect, but it is quite better compared to what we were in past. Now, while I take you through this analysis, this is going to be, by the way, it is going to be very data centric. It is not going to be based on conjecture, as I never do any analysis based on conjecture on my views alone. It is going to be a data centric analysis, and while you go through this analysis, you will yourself realize that what kind of risk and opportunity that we face, that we should be concerned about and need to work more to overcome those challenges. So let's start this discussion without wasting any time. Now, before I get into this analysis, I'll always try to point to the primary source of data where I have gathered this information. So if you go to the RBI's website, you will see that there are two tables. One is HBS table number 232. Let me take my pen. So this is the table number which you can find. You can go and download this table. So this table actually gives you, let me shift this away from this. So this table gives you different types of metric. And these are not absolute numbers. These are numbers which are as a percentage of GDP and on various financial years. If you see that all the financial years are listed here, and if you go down this table, you will find that the numbers are starting from FY71. So this is a very interesting table because it becomes very difficult to otherwise gather this information, because the GDP numbers will keep on changing, the base will keep on changing. The RBI has already done this work. So this is one of the table. And then we have the other table which is for the state governments, which is also similar. Only difference between this table and the earlier table was that the earlier table was till FY24 and this table is till FY23. That's the only difference. It is just a phase lag of 1 year, right? So this is the original source of information. Now, having seen the original source of information, I would like to basically also tell you that the tool that I'm going to show you, which I've created, needs this data in this particular format. Means that for that format that you saw here, which was kind of in a tabular format with all the matrices listed within the columns, that actually it does not help me because I need to put this in my tool, and therefore I need this in this particular format, where if you go down and you will see that the information is like this. It kind of goes on, and we have got 4 columns here. The column 1 is date, column 2 is metric, then we have value, and then we have type, center, and state. Okay, so let's now look at the code first. So what I've done is that I've simply used a very simple Python calculation and processing to transform this table from the existing horizontal one to vertical one. And I don't want to go through this code because that is not the purpose of this. I'm just giving you a flavor as to what I have done in order to go forward with the analysis. Now I have created a Streamlit-based application, and this application in this particular format, and I'm going to give you the flavor of the code, and this is the code that I have written and which is going to be available in my GitHub page, and anybody who's interested We can actually go ahead and have a look at it. Now let's go straight to the application. Now what this application does is, this application is able to filter the dimension. So what you can actually have a drop down menu here, center and state, okay, and then you can basically go and choose a particular dimension, whatever you want to view. For example, let's say if I want to choose gross fiscal deficit, then the gross fiscal deficit will get visible here, and then as I play this animation is going to move over the various time period, and it will tell you that how the gross fiscal deficit has fluctuated over the period of so many years till the current year of FY 24. So that's the whole idea about this, right? So let's do this. Let's first look at the key metric, which kind of gives us a character of our economy, how the economy has changed over a period of time. The first thing which I like to tell you before I even go into this discussion is that what is the meaning of government account. Now, on a high level, let's have an understanding of a government account. Government account is not different from private sector or an individual account. So let's say you are an individual. You are earning through a normal job, right? Let's say if you are making 100 rupees per month, okay? Now, if your expense is within that 100 rupees, whatever expense that you do, let's say if you are purchasing food, basic necessities of life, clothing, paying rent of your house or EMI, etc. If that is within that 100 rupees, then you will be in a comfortable position, right? Let's say if you are spending 60 rupees, 70 rupees, and you end up saving 30 rupees, right? That is the normal way of thinking. Now 30 rupees you can make investments, or you can buy an asset which will give you a cash flow over a period of time. For example, if you end up buying a house, right, or buy something which you pay EMI of, or let's say take a loan and then pay EMI of using that 30 rupees, so that you can create an asset which can give you perpetual income in terms of rental opportunity or anything else. So that is a positive investment that you're doing within that 100 rupees that you're earning. Now let's assume that instead of consuming only 60 rupees from your day-to-day expense, and you end up consuming, let's say, 150 rupees. Your earning is 100 rupees and you end up consuming 150 rupees, right? So there is a 50 rupees of deficit, which is called revenue deficit. Now, how will you bridge this revenue deficit? Now, you can bridge this revenue deficit by taking loans, because you have to borrow from the market, because you are not able to meet your expenses, you are earning less and you are basically spending more. So this is a typical situation which our government gets into from a long-term point of view. Generally, you will see that most of the government will not be able to make up for all their daily expenses. For example, paying salaries, all kinds of interest payments that they have to do for the loans that they have taken in past. Those they cannot meet within their revenue earnings that they do through direct tax and indirect tax, right? So they cannot do it. So what they have to do is that they have to carry market loans in order to meet their revenue expenditure, which goes beyond that 100 rupees. And then on top of that, they have to also make capital expenditure. For example, you have to make roads, you have to make bridges, because those are going to be required in order for the government to create an economy which can generate more cash flow. Because if you do not make this investment, the economy cannot generate more cash flow. Now that you have to do within a short block of money which is left out after having to meet your excess revenue expenditure. So that's not a very healthy situation for this country. Okay, so let's now, having understood this fundamental principle, let's now dive into the details. So what I am going to do is that before I go into deficit, let me go into the income. So there are two types of income which the government basically makes. One is direct tax and another is indirect tax. Let's look at the direct tax and indirect tax. So let's say gross direct tax and gross indirect tax. Okay, so let's look at these two dimensions. Now, why I am basically focusing on direct and indirect tax, you will understand, because what happens is that in an economy, there are two types of taxes which the government of India collects. Now, that is a reflection of the health of the economy, of the health of the taxation system. For example, if you are, lopsided in collecting more indirect taxes, then you are putting a uniform burden on the overall population who doesn't even have proportionate income to pay for their daily expenses. But if you are collecting more direct taxes, then you are basically charging those people who actually are earning more, and they are paying a proportion amount of their earnings as taxes. So, in an economy, direct taxes should be a larger proportion than the indirect taxes. That's how the health of the economy is seen. Now, let's start and play this, and I'll drag this going forward, and you'll see that initially, right, in 1976, let me just see whether it starts in 19, yeah. So let's say 1976, this data is in 1976, you will find that the economy was heavily loaded towards indirect taxes, because the indirect taxes, which is down below, let me just shift this face here. So you'll see indirect taxes was 6.46% of our nominal GDP. Direct taxes was 2.67% of our nominal GDP. Now, as I drag this, let me just drag this or play this animation, you will find that the gap will narrow. The gap between the direct taxes will narrow as we progress forward in time, which is a healthy sign for the economy, which is very, very significant. Look at this. The gap was so high in 1995-94. And in 1999, 2001, you see the gap is going less and less. And now the direct taxes, in 2014-15, the direct taxes actually had surpassed and overtaken indirect taxes, which is a very good thing. So this is actually a very good thing. So that's why I'm saying that, if you get a larger picture of the economy as you progress forward in time from future till now, you will see the character of the economy has been changing. Now, if I pull this, and you'll see that the changes, how the changes are happening. In 2021, for a brief period, indirect taxes overshot the direct taxes, right? Now, if you go here, see, in 2022, direct taxes were high, and it is going high, and the bridge and the gap is increasing, which is a good thing, right? Now, this might have been, so this is a little bit of fluctuating here and there, but we will become a healthy economy if we are able to contain the indirect taxes, because indirect taxes is a detrimental for the poor population of the country. They are paying tax. When you say that we as rich people are only paying tax, no, poor are also paying significant amount of tax. Look at this. In 2017, 5.63% of the total GDP, the indirect taxes was 5.60% of the total nominal GDP, and only 5.52% of the total nominal GDP was direct taxes. So this is a very important point about the economy, how the economy has changed from the point of view of direct and indirect taxes. Now let's look at in one more dimension, which is subsidies, because subsidies and interest payment is a very significant part of our expenses, and we have to basically take those into account. So let's look at subsidy, because subsidies are not good expenses. Ideally, though politically it is important, sometimes socially it is important to give subsidy, but normally the subsidy does not generate cash flows. It does not create asset. It is just for sustaining purposes only. It's not a very good thing. So there are two things which we will basically include here in this analysis: subsidies and interest payment, because interest payment is also a burden for the government because of past loan which it has to take in order to cover its excess payment or excess expenses that it has to incur on top of the earning that they are making. The earnings are not sufficient enough to cover up those expenses. So let's look at this. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm also going to bring the gross fiscal deficit into picture, so that you will be able to get a sense as to where we stand as far as these three dimensions are concerned. So let's look at this: subsidy, interest payment, and gross fiscal deficit. Now, if I drag this, right, and you'll see that in the beginning, in 1973, the subsidies were 0.36% of the overall GDP, interest payments were also 1.38% of the overall GDP, and the fiscal deficit was roughly around 3.88%, which you can see right in your front of India. But as I drag this bar moving forward, you will see that both subsidies and interest payments actually is now going up the towards the forward direction, as that is driving our fiscal deficit higher. Now, subsidies are within a window period of range. It is not moving very, very high, though that's why the government knows that they have to contain subsidy. But if you look at the interest payment, you will see the interest payment is going up and up, right, in the forward direction, and it is becoming higher and higher percentages of the GDP. You see, look at this. In 1992, it was 3.95% of the GDP. Subsidies was 1.82% of the GDP. Now, as I drag forward, in 1996, interest payment was 4.08% of the GDP. Subsidies were 1.30% of the GDP. Now, as the interest payment obligation increases, it also drives our fiscal deficit. Both subsidies and interest payments are not productive expenditures. They are driving our fiscal deficit, and they are a burden to our overall economy. So let's look at this and how the character of our economy has changed over a period of time. So it is very clear that the government has been able to contain the subsidy within a short window period of fluctuation, but interest payment obligation has been rising, and over a brief period of time it basically went down, because when you carry market loans you have to pay interest, and the interest payment obligation also increases if the RBI repo rate changes. If it is higher, then for short-term treasury bills that you have to pay interest, those are linked directly to RBI's repo rate, and therefore your interest payment obligation will rise. Now, as I drag this going forward, you will notice that by 2019 the interest payment obligation was 3.08%, but as soon as you go beyond the COVID period, you'll see that suddenly the interest and the repo rate has also increased. You will find that both subsidy, look at this, in year 2021, both subsidy as well as interest payment were shot very high, and therefore the deficit basically went up to 9.17% of the GDP. Now, as I'm moving forward, the subsidies are now being driven down, but we have a larger obligation as far as interest payments are concerned. Now, at the end of the financial year, which is 31st March 2024, you can see that we have an interest payment obligation of 3.58% of the GDP, and these subsidies are around and pegged down at 1.34% of the GDP. So now you have to understand this very important fact that all the social schemes, the PLI and other things which the government of India is trying to promote, and all kinds of food subsidies, what kind of petroleum subsidies, etc., the bucket is only this. This only can fluctuate between 1% to 1.5%. You cannot basically drag this forward to a large amount of money percentage. You can't do that. So you will be able to understand that how our hands of the government is tied. They are very, very much tied as far as subsidies are concerned, because interest payment is not coming under control, though it is within a window period which is manageable. But still, if you look at the budget, you will notice that in the budget, let me just show you the budget. You will find that, let me just take you through the actual values of interest payment or the budgetary estimate. You will see that in FY24 the interest payment is already 12 lakh crores out of a total budget of 47.66 lakh crores. So you can understand the kind of problem that the government of India will be as far as interest payments are concerned. So after having discussed this dimension, let's look at some other dimensions which are going to be extremely important for us to understand. So let's look at, let me just choose, and I'm doing it on the fly because I don't have any kind of script written for this video. So what you want, let's look at one more thing, the capital expenditure and the revenue expenditure, because this is very important, capital and revenue expenditure, because the kind of expenditure that we make drives our potential of the economy to generate more cash flow in future, because revenue expenditure is not going to result in longer term cash flow. It is just an OPEX expense from a company point of view, because when you are doing balance sheet of a company or profit and loss of the company, you have revenue expense and you have got capital expense, and capital expense are expenses which you incur in order to drive your company to generate more cash flow. Revenue expense is only day-to-day expense in order to run the company. Similarly, for the government, these two types of expenditure is going to tell you how the character of our economy has changed over a period of time. So let's look at this, and I'd like to play this first before I drag it. Look at this. Let me just stop it. Otherwise, I'm going to basically make this video more optimal, because I have got less time to cover many topics. So let's look at from 1971. Look at 1971. Capital expenditure and revenue expenditure were almost neck to neck. It was 5.24% of the GDP, 6.57% of the GDP. That's the kind of number. Now, as I go forward in time, you'll see that the gap between this will increase. Now, though it is quite understandable, the base was quite low at this time in 1975 and 79, 84, but still the gap is increasing. You see, the revenue expenditure is becoming more, the capital expenditure, though it was still 5.42% of the GDP, the revenue expenditure in 1991 was at the time of balance of payment crisis, India's balance, if you recall, 12.54%. Now, if I drag this forward, you see that still the gap is increasing. In 1997, the capital expenditure became 2.96% of the GDP, and the revenue expenditure is 11.2% of the GDP. Now, let me just drag this forward. See, the gap has been increasing, and it went very low in 2008 at the time when the crisis, the global economic crisis was there. Our capital expenditure was 2.37% of the GDP and revenue was still around 12%. Let me just drag this forward, and you will see that it dropped to 1.68% of the GDP, the capital expenditure, in March 2013, and the revenue expenditure went high to 12 points. So in 2013-14, the number was very, the gap was extremely large. Now, it was within that particular range, till to March 31st of 2018. And if I drag it further now, you'll see that suddenly the government realized that the capital expenditure is important, and they started spending on capital expenditure. You see that the government is making a lot of claims of increasing capital expenditure. This is a recent phenomena, by the way. This is not a phenomena of the past, because earlier we were doing higher capex, but in the middle period of this period between 1971 and 2004, we were doing dismal on capital expenditure. Now you see the capital expenditure has started increasing, though marginally. It is not a substantial increase of capital expenditure, which is to be understood that we have a long way to go. And what is killing this? What is killing our capital expenditure? If I add one more dimension to this, you will understand where the problem is. The problem is interest payments and maybe subsidies too. So if I put these two things together and blow this, and let me put my face out from this, and I start running this, and you'll see that how, let me just take my face here. Okay. So if I run this, you will see that because the interest payment and subsidies are eating away all our revenue, we really don't have much to spend on capital expenditure. That's the problem. That is the problem. We have to kill down, why we have to manage our fiscal deficit? The reason is interest payment. Because look at this, interest payment is eating away 3.43% of our GDP, and if this money was reduced to, let's say, 1% of the GDP, we could have a surplus of around 3% or maybe around 2.5%, which you could have drive into the capital expenditure, which we can't. Or you have to increase your revenue income in order to ensure, or decrease your revenue expenditure. That's the only way to drive this forward. So that's the constraint that we have. Okay. Now let's look at the other dimension here. Let me take my face back here and down below, and then let me just do the following, bring it back. And what we want to do now is to basically look at a couple of more dimensions and see the capital receipt and the revenue. No, let's do the one more thing. which is important. Net RBI credit to the government, and this is a very important dimension, by the way. Now, what is this dimension? Let's understand this. See, look, our government, in order to bridge fiscal deficit, borrows from the market. That's the trend. You borrow from the market. But sometimes what happens is that instead of borrowing from the market, we take credit from the RBI. Now, what RBI will do? RBI, when they gives credit, it will print money and give to the government. Now, that is going to add to the liquidity, and not only it will add to the liquidity, it will increase the money supply. Let's say if you don't take credit from the RBI and you take credit from the market, then you are basically pooling from the same bucket of money which is already there in the market. You are not pulling from the RBI, which has got the authority to print more money. So borrowing from the market is a healthy method of funding your expenses, because it doesn't drive inflation, because as the money supply increases, the inflation also gets higher. So you have to contain the money supply. So sometimes what happens is that the government finds it very difficult to borrow from the market because of the obligation of higher interest payment, etc., which we already spoke about. So it becomes very easy for the government to borrow from the RBI, and RBI prints cash and gives to the government. So let's look at the trend, what the government actually did, since 1971. So if this is positive, means that more money is being put in the economy, which is 0.92% of the GDP in 1974. Means your liquidity is increasing. But if it is negative, means the government is pulling back money from the so RBI is pulling back money from the government. See, look, in 1978 it was minus 0.25 of the GDP. Now let's go forward in time. So you see that there have been periods in 1987 when substantial amount of money was drawn from RBI by the government to do liquidity management. See? And in 1993, 1994, the number reduces. So this number will keep on fluctuating. Now let's look at the current trend. Starting from March 2000, let's say 10. In March 2009, just after the the economic crisis, we had an RBI pumping 3.1% of the GDP money to the system. Why? You will yourself know, because at that time the economy was down. It has to be given some fillip. More money was supposed to be pushed into the system. So the government needed more cash in order to give the economy more impetus. So they basically got money from RBI by printing money from RBI. So now you see that the money went down and then suddenly it went low and it became 1% of the GDP. And by 2015, the money actually went to minus 27% of the GDP, means the government was pushing back money back to the RBI. Then what happens at the time of demonetization and other period, there was a fluctuation between these numbers. And now if you see, as of date, if I take you through 31st March 2022, the government was borrowing from RBI to an extent of 1.5% of the GDP. The money was being pushed into the system by RBI, right? And then in 31st March 2023, this became 0.01% of the GDP, and now it is being shown as a very low number. I don't know why it is 0%. That is the government calculation. This is not my calculation. But anyway, so that's the essence of this discussion as far as the RBI's the net credit to the government to the center, the RBI credit to the government to center. Now we are already 28 minutes in this video. I do not have any other time left to cover other dimensions. This could have been a very interesting. So what I'm going to do with this tool that I have created, it took me around 1 day to create this tool. I'm going to paste a link. You can access this. This is right available in the net. You can play with this tool to have these kind of understanding about the economy going forward back in time and how it has changed over a period of time. There are multiple dimensions here to play with. So if you see here, I could not show state. You can basically choose state, and then you can basically look at the state's dimensions also and play with them. And you can basically look at the central dimensions and play with the a series of dimensions of center, of gross fiscal deficit, net fiscal deficit, gross primary deficit, net primary deficit. Now what is primary deficit? Primary deficit is nothing but net of interest payment. For example, if you want to evaluate how well you are doing as far as your income is concerned, revenues are concerned, and you exclude the interest payment obligation from your expenditure, the revenue expenditure, that is going to give a reflection that whether your income is commensurate in meeting your revenue expenditure if you keep your loan obligation interest payment aside. So there are many things which you can do and play with, which is all there here in this tool, and you can run with this tool and understand what is going on. Okay, so I will stop here. Already 30 minutes have passed. People will get otherwise bored, and you can do it yourself. You don't have to take your help, because I have already given you the code. You can go to my GitHub, take the code, you can play with the code, you can use this tool. It is a Streamlit application, a web-based application. You can play with this application and see for yourself how the economy has changed over a period of time. It's going to be a very good learning, because just by learning these numbers or these dimensions, reading a book does not give you any kind of understanding. You have to play with the numbers first. Then only you will be able to get a better insight as to what is going on. And then you can actually have a positive outlook of our economy, rather than being always critical that we are doing bad, we are doing worse. No, we have made a lot of improvements, but there are a lot of other scope of improvements in order to drive our economy better. So I hope that you have liked this video, and if you have any comments or suggestions, let me know. I'll be happy to address those and respond to those questions. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll come back to you with a new video next time. Thank you very much.